Harry's Wife, Part 105.2.3. The Sussex Series. She dumps. Harry becomes too difficult to control. Hello, I'm HG Tudor, continuing my fascinating analysis of prospective scenarios with regard to the relationship between the Sussexes. We are currently in the section that revolves around Harry's wife disengaging from Harry, i.e. she ends the formal relationship for him. And in this particular subsection, it's on the basis that he has become too difficult to control. As you should know by now, that a narcissist either consciously, or more usually subconsciously, seeks the prime aims. The prime aims are the ability to control the relevant appliance when the appliance comes on the radar of the narcissist. So, for instance, when somebody walks into the room as a secondary source, i.e. a family member, the narcissism has to determine, is this person under control? And if they're not, we must get them under control. If they are under control, let's keep them under control. Therefore, control is extremely important, and this is sought as a consequence of the fact that the narcissist is hypersensitive to the issue of control, having been created from an environment where the narcissist did not have control, i.e. the lack of control environment. And if you want to understand what makes a narcissist, then, funnily enough, you can watch my video, What Makes a Narcissist? Indeed, I insist you do so to ensure you understand. The other prime aims, of course, include fuel, which is essentially a form of response, reaction, attention that is given by an appliance to the narcissist and comes in many different forms. You should read my excellent book, Fuel, to understand more about that. There are character traits. See the video, character trait acquisition, and then residual benefits. Residual benefits are wide-ranging and can span from brilliant sex, access to networks, financial support, a roof over the head, being given a lift, somebody to apply medication, and so forth. There are lots of different residual benefits. And it is these four things that the narcissism either consciously or subconsciously seeks out. With regard to each appliance, not all four aspects are always sought. Usually it's the first two, control and fuel. With regard to the issue of control, where you threaten the narcissist's control either through wounding or challenge fuel, two of the three interactions that you have with the narcissist, then the narcissism is duty-bound to nullify the threat to control that you've posed, and does so through either a direct assertion of control, an indirect assertion of control, or a withdrawal scenario, either active or passive. To understand more about that, you can access from the Knowledge Vault the three assertions of control. Harry has to be controlled by Harry's wife whenever he's on the radar. So when he walks in the room, rings her up, sends her a message, pops into her thoughts, her narcissism dictates. Is he under control? Yes, good, keep it going. If not, bring him under control. And that's why we see various manipulations played out in terms of flattery, the physical control of him with the grip of doom, steering him around, etc. And there'll be plenty of other manipulations that go on behind the scenes to control him. The narcissism will plug away, trying to obtain that control directly until such time it determines that it's not appropriate, and then will shift to the indirect assertion of control or ultimately withdrawal. We always get control in some shape or form. Of course, where it's indirect or where we withdraw, that isn't control in the sense that you would understand it to be, because we have, in effect, created an alternative universe where we've asserted control, which is commensurate with the principle of flectere sine quaeo superos accelontem vivo, which roughly translated means, if I cannot move heaven, I will raise hell, i.e., if I cannot control you in your world, i.e., directly, then I will create an alternative world where I control you indirectly or by withdrawal. However, there comes a point in some instances of the dynamic where the intimate partner primary source just cannot be controlled. They aren't responding in the way that they once did. Their responses are muted, thus there's not as much fuel being given. They argue repeatedly. They walk off. They disappear for periods of time. They criticize and question. In effect, they become like an insurgency. And within that domestic environment, the narcissist that once reigned supreme is finding their need for hegemonic control being repeatedly threatened and challenged. And at the end of the day, like any good occupying force, there has to be made a decision as to, is it worth it? If the gains are good, it's worth continuing putting down the insurgency. But if the insurgency is forceful and strong and the prospective gains are not so good, then ultimately the narcissism dictates, fuck this for a game of soldiers, let's retreat and find somebody else. And thus disengagement occurs. So in this scenario, Harry does not leave, but he's had enough of being treated like shit. So he continues to remain involved with the children. He cares about them and he loves them, but he backs off from Harry's wife. He's sleeping in a separate bedroom. He barely communicates with her. He shrugs, doesn't look at her when he's talking to her. When she starts to berate him, rather than once upon a time seek to mollycoddle her and placate her, he just shakes his head and walks away. He gets on his bike and cycles off into town. He jumps in the car and drives off to go and see a mate. It might even be the case that he disappears and heads back to the United Kingdom or elsewhere for longer periods of time. There is even the possibility that he starts to have a secret affair. All of this adds up to him being too difficult to control. And as a combination of him behaving this way and the potential gains reducing, for instance, royal status has been diminished, the money is dropping off, and she believes that she's a star in her own right, such as her level of delusion, the narcissism basically says he isn't the prize that he once was, and he's becoming too difficult to control. Ditch him. And thus disengagement occurs. Where this happens, he is not likely to leave. But if he's spending time away, what she's likely to do is that whilst he is out of town or has gone on a visit somewhere, she will then go and seek a restraining order against him, change the locks, and basically cue Prince Harry turning up to find that there are cops waiting for him. There'll either be a quiet discussion where he's told, look, we'll organise for you to pick up your toothbrush and your pink pancakes from a handbag, but calm down, sir, time for you to go. Or there is a possibility that as a consequence of this continuing abuse, it erodes his emotional empathy, and we suddenly see the appearance of Hothead Harry, as his narcissistic traits of resentment, defiance, pride, and argumentativeness, along with anger, come to the fore, and he kicks off. Cue his pink pancakes being tasered, this time not by Harry's wife, but Monty Shitshow Police Department, or the relevant equivalent. She would then, of course, if he were so foolish as to lose it in this manner, use it against him, and file it under, see, this is what I've had to deal with. She has, of course, during this time, been smearing him heavily privately. Why? Well, remember, she doesn't bail by disengaging from him at the first sign of him causing a problem for her. Of course not. She devalues him and sometimes gives him a respite period to draw him back in and keep him under control, and often that will have worked. But in some instances where she seeks to assert control over him and it's not working, she still has to have that control. And what happens is her narcissism guides her to complain about him to third parties, that inner circle of friends and any family that she perhaps might now be dealing with, most notably probably her mother. And so what happens is she will start to say, oh, Harry's off again. I think he's seeing some other woman. Now, it might be Harry's just decided that he's gone for a bike ride, but her narcissism will portray it that he's up to something nefarious. She will complain, he never talks to me any longer. He demands sex each and every moment of the day, and I'm absolutely worn out. My punani is like a ragman's coat these days. It might be the case that she will say, he physically attacks me, I don't know what to do. Her narcissism utilising, of course, the telling of untruths and half-truths against him. Of course, we know that Harry does have a temper, so there will be instances as a consequence of his fight back from the abuse that he shouts and kicks off. She, of course, will edit the story, driven by her narcissism, to say that he just started shouting at her, rather than, of course, the truth, that he responded to her provocative behaviours. All this means that each and every time where he threatens her sense of control and she can't do it directly, there's a good chance that she'll turn to a member of the coterie and complain about him. What this does, and it is not intentional, but is a collateral consequence of the repeated assertions of control indirectly, is it starts to paint a picture. So let's say, for example, at the beginning of this year, he threatens control and she can't get him directly. She complains about it to mother. Then again in January, she complains about it to her personal assistant. And then again in January, she complains about his behaviour to a friend. And then in February to the same friend. Then in February to her mother again. And each and every instance where Harry threatens her control, she gains control subconsciously by indirectly gaining it through smearing him. This, of course, paints a picture. In Doria's mind, that Harry's not very nice. In the friend's mind, that Harry's an arsehole. That in the staff member, that Harry kicks off. And therefore, those members of the coterie, already looking at her in a favourable way, are given the view that Harry's the problem. Of course, nothing is done because they're still together. But now, at the point that she disengages from, the narcissism, in order to continue to assert control over him, then makes use of the fact that in the past, bringing up the past, that he has been abusing her. And so she gets the friend to file an affidavit, her mother to file an affidavit about all those previous instances of bad behaviour. And she, of course, explains that she didn't leave at that time because she was wanted to be there for the children, but it's now got to the point that it's too much. This can create a very convincing view, where you have a number of witnesses, whilst not wholly independent, but given the number of them that come out of the coterie to swear affidavits on behalf of the narcissist to go before the court. And this creates a very difficult position for the victim. There's a body of evidence against them, and it does paint a picture. And somebody like Harry's wife, having utilised that as part of the instigation of divorce proceedings and having the police called on him and getting restraining orders, etc., will then use this heavy smearing that was utilised privately and then will bring it into the open as part of a public campaign. She's instigated divorce. Child custody is in play, and she plays the victim repeatedly, bringing to the fore the private abuse that she has suffered, making it public. Here, Harry isn't going to take it lying down. Of course, he has been fighting her control for the last number of months, and this time he fights hard. And in this scenario, he might actually score some significant wins against her, as he's actually going to be more willing to fight dirty with her. He's had enough of the way that he's been treated, and he's aghast at the way that she's smearing him because that simply wasn't correct. And in such circumstances, as a consequence of the diminution of his own emotional empathy, causing his narcissistic traits to come to the fore, he may more than be willing to dish the dirt on her. This might include what has gone on within the marriage, the way that she's treated other people, and of course, there is undoubtedly a black box containing all of the information that was dug up about her before they got married. And Harry may well, particularly with suitable guidance, be willing to unlock that box and throw its contents into the ring. This would make for a very public spectacle of so much mud being slung around. But ultimately, this could happen because he's suitably feisty, which caused the disengagement, and that feistiness continues. He's not been ground down. He's not broken. And when she starts fighting dirty, he fights dirty back. And there becomes an almighty clusterfuck of a divorce and child custody case. And in the mix, Harry becomes best mates with Tom Bower and Piers Morgan. Another fascinating outcome that could occur if Harry becomes too difficult to control and she then seeks to assert control thereafter through the smearing, having disengaged from him because he's no longer reliable as an appliance because she can't control him. And that problem with control will run on, meaning that she has to smear and withdraw as he fights against her. And it would make a rather unedifying, albeit ghoulish spectacle for the rest of the world to watch these two fight it out. I'm HG Tudor. Thank you for listening.